Я є прихильником свободи слова. Мені може не подобатись те, що відбувається на програмі, але я віддам життя за те, щоб вона була.
Welcome to Shuster Live in English from Kiev, the capital of Ukraine. We'll talk about Donbass. What is happening in eastern Ukraine? Is there peace in sight? DIRK LUSTIG, a German journalist, producer and photographer, has just come back from the region of Donbass, and he will tell us all about his fresh impressions. VALENTYN NALYVAYCHENKO, he was the head of the security service of Ukraine from 2006 to 2010, and now is leading a civic movement which is called Justice. Jason Smart, a political scientist. GULLIVER CRAGG, a correspondent for France 24 in Ukraine and Poland. And Peter Dickinson, chief editor of Business Ukraine magazine. So, Dirk, what did you see, what did you hear, what did you understand?
You want to start the show with a depressive note. Summary, depressing. It's my 15th or 20th trip to Donetsk. For the first time we were not allowed to work, but of course we saw a lot.
You were not allowed to work by whom?
By the local authorities. You need to get an accreditation. And
you were in the zone, in the area which is not controlled by Ukrainian
absolutely.
Armed forces?
I was in both. We ended the depression with 2 days of holidays in Shirokine. But first we went to Donetsk. And although we were told before that we were not welcomed, we still went there and tried to settle the issue. But it didn't work out. And I haven't been in Donetsk since May. And it was even more depressing than in May, because you understand that with each week, each month, to get back to the pre-2014 situation becomes more and more difficult, for the simple reason that more and more people start to get accustomed to the situation. And although in Donetsk you never have quite 24 hours, life is absolutely picking up, if you can say so. And it is difficult to see that all restaurants, bars are operating again. I know that there are a lot of reports showing empty streets, people hiding at home, waiting to get freed. If you want to speak honestly about the situation, it is not the case. You have, again, cars all over the city. In 2014, all shops, restaurants were closed. One after the other, they reopened. And also the big structures, this was new. This time even the former Metro Cash and Carry was open. Epicenter is open, of course renamed. It has nothing to do with the initial epicenter. But you really have all structures that are again operating. You have plenty of goods. Unfortunately, also still Ukrainian goods. What I personally don't understand with the embargo, and very often massively. This time, if we take a good, I don't know if you should speak about brands, but if you take a big brand like Coca-Cola, in May, you could find all their products in each little kiosk, restaurants, hotels. So it is for sure not Dядя Vanya who is bringing this in with his precept, but it is brought in massively. So you also have as a new phenomenon all big structures like Kiev Conti, the sweets, the chocolates. They're again all over the place with the rebranding. Olymp vodka is not called anymore Olymp, but is again on the shelves with a rebranding. Apparently Nord, the fridges have been bought by a Russian structure, so also again operating. So it is very depressive because you see less and less how things can go back. People understand that they are not welcomed in Russia. I think that all intellectual people, they understand that Russia will not take them, but they don't feel like they can go back to Ukraine. And it's not only old people, it's young people in the hotel, intelligent people who tell you, we also wish peace to Ukraine. When you ask them, being whom? They don't know. We are Donbass, we are Donbass. So they understand that they're in a kind of like dreamland, but they clearly say, we don't want to go back. So,
is there still a curfew?
Yes, absolutely. But even curfew, you have night taxis now. So if you would really like to go somewhere or really need something, then you call Uncle Vanya from the night taxi, who has whatever special permissions, and then you can drive around even after the curfew. So.
And what, you have nightclubs, discotheques? Where do you go at night?
No, me personally, I stay.
No,
in
not
the
you.
hotel
I mean, not
no,
you. But
apparently, for nightclubs, you have two versions. One version is to go home and be a good person at just before 11 for the curfew. If you're a bad person, then you just stay until the curfew finishes at 6 in the morning. So you have two options, the night option and the evening option.
And there is artillery fire during the night?
Yes, absolutely. There's not, in both cases, neither around Mariupol nor in Donetsk, you don't have one single calm night. I was in June also embedded, and we went to Avdiivka, Zaitsevo, and Svitlodarsk, and this was even worse. I mean, I personally call it playing battleship with human lives, because each night you just sing pounding, and in the morning you have this dramatic statistics of 1 wounded in action, 2 killed in action, or 2 killed in action, 6 wounded in action. So it's like battleship with human lives. So depressive.
So if you have questions, you just ask. Let's discuss
if I
it.
may, first, congratulations for English language broadcasting Shuster Live. That's our applause. But back to the point. Let us not be deceived by Russian propaganda or the cover of so-called normal life in both Donetsk and Lugansk, temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine. This is not Donbass. Let's use right names. This is temporarily occupied territories. Absolutely. First. And the second point, what we need to tell to the whole world, and for Ukrainians as well, the first maybe auditorium, is to real war crimes, real suffering people, like more than 1 million all around the country. They left Donetsk and Lugansk temporarily occupied territories. They left their apartments, their private property, their businesses there. We should talk about that more and more, and to show this real picture of people who actually got so many losses. And the second point, not to forget about hostages. Behind this cover, Savik and all who actually people who are now, let's say, watching us, let's remember human beings. More than 100 now in Phase B, or we can call it however, temporary jails in both territories, not in nightclubs, but they are located there. Now, so far, this day, even this night we are talking, 9 places where 108 or 109 hostages are being tortured right now in Ukraine. That's my, let's say, introduction to what you have just
And in general, the human rights situation?
Again, you should distinguish of the people who try to change things and the people who accept. What I want to say is that in 2014, the whole city was scared. It was an atmosphere that was terrible. Now there are people who just accept and think about their own life. Of course, they are hostages. I think your figure is most probably underestimated, because there are still so many people who are missing in action after Ilovaisk.
Even more.
I think this is the official figure. So this is for sure absolutely dramatic. For me, it is always amazing when the international community speaks about elections in the occupied territories, because It is. I think Ukrainian diplomacy is not using always the right approach when they're having these dialogues internationally, because our French and German friends say you need to have elections, and then you get the border back, and Ukrainian side always answer, no, give us first the border back, and then we have elections. I think this is the wrong approach. You need to show that it is technically, physically, totally impossible to hold elections
I agree.
in a territory where you have people running around with machine guns or other even worse tools. So I think the confrontation is wrong. I think the confrontation should be how you want to make election. Super, let's have elections. Next month, how? How? We have 10 big parties in Ukraine.
And who are those voters? Exactly.
So I think the diplomatic approach is completely wrong from Ukrainian side, saying that, yeah, first the border, then elections. Elections, how? Okay, I want to have elections with the top 10 Ukrainian parties. How? They cannot even open an office there.
Yeah.
You want to put 1 million people to protect them or what? It is insane.
But although Ukraine's approach in making this argument perhaps wasn't the best, I think the argument has, for the time being, been more or less won. You don't now hear the French and Germans pressuring Ukraine to hold elections. I mean, the last time that I spoke to the French ambassador, it seemed that they were pretty clear that the text of Minsk says elections must be held under Ukrainian electoral law. Everybody understands that Ukrainian electoral law does not allow for elections to be held when there are no foreign journalists, no independent observers, and people with guns everywhere, and that it's therefore impossible. I mean, I think broadly that for the time being it's been accepted that there's no way elections can be held now in the territories not controlled by Ukraine.
But even elections are not going to solve the problem.
Yes, of course. Yes, of course. That is why I think we again have to talk first and always about security package. Security package for both temporarily occupied territories, Lugansk and Donetsk. And security package, what you have just mentioned, like for common people, for ordinary life, not to forget each and every war crime against Ukraine, against humanity here in this country. Prosecution for those, like we have just seen this Motorola, let's say, billboard. He's a criminal, according to Ukrainian legislation, international legislation. But for Ukraine, absolutely, government and law enforcement bodies, general prosecutor's office, it's high time to start to prosecute those like who is responsible for each and every war crime. This is the right picture. This is the, like, let us say, for international community and for us, for Ukraine. In these circumstances, whatever France or Germany will insist on, we have our, let's say, proofs, evidences, and right lawful position, legal position on this particular situation in our country. And who is aggressor? Let's mention directly that the aggressor is Russian Federation. With their military troops, military equipment, Savik, right now in Donetsk or Lugansk, they've brought from Russia 528 tanks, heavy tanks, Russian tanks. They brought and equipped weaponry depots, not only epicenter you mentioned, but let's talk about military and weaponry depots. Enough for 2.5 years active combat operations and shelling into Ukrainian territory. That's a huge weaponry, let's say, so far. And we have got, I mean, Ukraine, it from Russia. And again, the last but not least, who is coordinating all this stuff in Donetsk and Lugansk? Please, you're Western journalists. Mr. Surkov, who is he? Guy who actually operated the anti-revolution of dignity activity here in Kiev, Savik, in this city. Let's not forget about that. Plus, FSB, under his control and coordination, I mean, Mr. Surkov and others, like Arzenba and others, like they're coordinating still all this propaganda, cover. See, this is so more or less normal life. They are coordinating all this hostages stuff, and they are coordinating all this Zaharchenko and other, let's say, frontmen, who is like speaking on behalf of whoever in Lugansk and Donetsk people. That's what I think.
That's the elephant in the room, you could say, the Russian role, and it often strikes me as it must be fascinating or perhaps maddening to be in the discussions with, for example, NATO and Russia or EU and Russia, where they sit down and attempt to try and begin the process of conflict resolution, and at some point early on they must say, well, you must withdraw your troops, and they say, well, we don't have any troops. And where does the conversation go from there? Until there's it's a bit like, you know, with the Alcoholics Anonymous, and the person has to stand up and say, you know, I'm an alcoholic. And in this case, I think, you know, Vladimir Putin has to stand up and say, you know, I am Vladimir Putin, and I have a problem with hybrid war. You know, he has to acknowledge that he's in the mix before they could, you know, until he acknowledges, or Russia acknowledges their status, it's almost impossible to imagine how the situation can be resolved. Because as it is...
If I may, that was a very important issue you have just touched upon. But I remember 1.5 years ago, in American Senate and Congress, personally, I've proved with the evidence of Russian aggression to both bipartisan majority of the Senate and Congress, with the hard evidences and proofs, here they are. I mean Russian aggressors, their tanks, their artillery, those losses, hostages. That means for us, for Ukraine, we have a position. And then, when you have position, when you have proofs, when you have clear understanding what is going on in your country and who is aggressor, we have to talk to international community. France, Germany, the United States, but with proofs. Well, this not is like just mentioned. Sitting people are talking like...
No, but this is the diplomatic issue now that the...
Okay, Peter, let's take the best case scenario and the worst case scenario, and then discard them, because it never happens. The best case scenario, you have a popular uprising in Donetsk and Lugansk. They throw over those people who are governing them with guns, and they come back to Ukraine. That's the best case scenario. The worst case scenario, they get incorporated into Russian Federation, one way or another.
Oh, yeah.
So for them, the worst case scenario is probably things staying the way they are. Being incorporated into the Russian Federation for them would probably be better than how things are right now for them. I mean, it's not something that Ukraine would necessarily wish for, but the worst case scenario is how it is.
Yep.
I totally agree. I think that it's so evident that Russia doesn't plan at any stage to incorporate those two republics into Russia. If you have any even thoughts about this, you don't completely take back to Russia full.
Don't forget, it depends on the Russian leader.
Oh, yes.
Today is one, and we don't know who's going to be tomorrow.
You think that the next one is going to be better? I think the next one might even be much worse.
So then you get incorporated.
No, because it's much better like this. Incorporated, it means that you need to take care of those people. The infrastructure is destroyed on such a level that I'm sure whether Putin...
They took it to Russia in many ways.
They took full factories.
Absolutely.
To Russia.
Agree.
Why to do this if you have any thoughts to... And what to do with the Donbass? Look what they did with their coal industry in the Russian part of Donbass.
True.
They just closed it down. So I think that my worst case scenario is to continue like it is today for another 10, 20, 30 years. You know, when people think, yeah, it needs to be settled very fast. I mean, the Cyprus issue started in '74, and we are now in 2016, and it is not solved. Look at Prednistrova, look at Abkhazia. Unfortunately, those conflicts can last very, very long, with the difference that this is not a frozen conflict, because each day people get injured, each day people die. Each day people get kidnapped, because we have a little piece of Stalinism also there, so it's very cool now to, if you have a neighbor that annoys you, to make a small phone call and say, I think my neighbor is pro-Ukrainian. So there were clear cases of people who just were taken to the basement because the neighbor decides that he's pro-Ukrainian. So I think the worst case scenario is not an incorporation. The worst case scenario is to continue as it is today for a long time. This is...
On the Ukrainian side, though, there were posters up inviting people also to call up the SBU if they suspected their neighbours of being pro-Russian or pro-separatist. So it's on both sides, and I'm not sure that kind of attitude from Ukraine, even if there are people who argue that it's necessary for security reasons, I don't think it encourages people in the parts of Donetsk and Lugansk oblasts which are controlled by Ukraine to feel very sympathetic to the Ukrainian state. In Kramatorsk, Mariupol, places like that, if the Ukrainian state is inviting them to denounce their neighbors and that kind of thing.
Jason, don't you get an impression that Ukrainian side, Kiev, is very slow in reacting?
I think exactly right. I think the Kiev side is very slow. And one of the chief mistakes is not providing enough evidence to the international community. They're allowing this conflict to be forgotten. I think that when you look at what's going on in Washington, it's not as much of a conversation about Ukraine. What's next for it? People aren't talking as much about this in Brussels as they were before. And I think it's really key at this moment that Ukraine should be providing more evidence and keeping fresh in people's minds that this is not a Ukrainian conflict. This is Russian aggression against Ukraine ordered by Vladimir Putin. And as long as we keep up that tactic and we keep pushing this and providing fresh evidence every week, every day, all the time, and making sure people don't forget, I think that's what Ukraine should be doing right now. But the government is not doing that.
I think Ukraine needs to be doing that within Ukraine as well. I sometimes get the impression, talking to sort of ordinary Ukrainians, that they themselves have forgotten that this is Russian aggression and it's not the fault of the people who are in the Donbass. You hear people on a day-to-day basis in Kiev and elsewhere fed up of what's going on in the east and sometimes inclined to blame the people of Donetsk and Lugansk for what happened to them. I think Ukrainians themselves really need to keep it in mind all the time that in the last independent survey that was done in the Donbass before it became impossible to carry out surveys, 70% of people in Donetsk and Lugansk oblasts said they wanted to stay part of Ukraine. They weren't interested in independence or joining Russia. This was already after Crimea. And Ukrainians themselves need to keep that in mind all the time.
Yeah, I agree. And for us, Savik, I think for Ukraine, we have to actually get and have our Ukrainian scenario for both territories, Donetsk and Lugansk,
right.
are occupied.
Is there a scenario? Is there a Ukrainian scenario?
What I think is important for this scenario, for the government, president himself, and who is now those people who are responsible for national security, first, preparatory stage or preparatory work, humanitarian, let's say freedom of press, mass media people, whatever, to travel, to be both sides, plus medical care, and to prepare the space for the
in Ukraine, they like certain words to pronounce them. They don't like to implement their meaning.
That's
reforms, roadmap. It sounds beautiful.
No, not about all this stuff. Real things.
I have a better one. Ministry of Information. It is amazing. In summer, we didn't manage to move fast enough, so we had to spend the night in Kurakhova. And I, as usual, woke up and switched on the TV, and I saw the face of Pushilin. Pushilin, who is one of the big leaders of... so we are in Kurakhova, a territorium that is controlled by Ukraine since 2014. And 2 years after that, they still don't know. It was the best hotel that they have in Kurakhova. Even there, they don't manage. We had 3 Russian channels and 2 DNR channels. Plot, and I forgot the name of the second one.
So-called Donetsk Republic, yeah?
Incredible.
Still.
We speak about Ukrainian-controlled territory. What are we talking about?
Right, yeah.
But why is there no Russian language channel in Ukrainian-controlled territory to speak to people who prefer to watch TV in Russian in these areas?
Disaster.
You are asking a question that has no, has no answer.
But if I may, Savik, not to interrupt you, but because now the president himself and his minister of information concentrated to what? To stop Shuster live broadcasting in Ukraine. Then there is no enough, let's say, time and efforts to stop all this disaster, informational disaster in eastern Ukraine. This is my response as of Ukrainian citizen and Ukrainian, let's say, NGO representative.
Well, this goes back to the corruption that's the fundamental problem here, and really at the root of everything else. Attacking the free press is just indicative of the larger corruption in this government.
That's true.
And their inability to prosecute this war is also related directly to the corruption that's found here.
Absolutely. We'll break for a couple of minutes. Welcome to Shuster Live from Kiev. So, Valentyn, let's talk a little bit about this roadmap, because very few people, I don't understand really what this government is doing. I don't. I understand that the Minsk agreements, which were imposed upon Ukraine by Russian force, NALYVAYCHENKO and Debaltsevo, Minsk 1, Minsk 2, don't work. That Mr. Hollande and Ms. Merkel are facing their own problems, their own future elections, and they're going to pay attention less and less to this process. As far as the new American president is concerned, we don't know. So it's all in Ukrainian hands now.
Absolutely. I agree, Savik. But let's start talking. When you're going through hell, keep going. This is not my words, Mr. Churchill, please. But anyway, let's keep going. I've just briefly mentioned that we need Ukrainian scenario, not roadmap, not talking, not blah, blah, blah on these issues, but Ukrainian plan, international community, international support. And Mr. Trump, yes, is crucial. His position and his, let's say, support to our peace plan for our territory. Territorial sovereignty, yes. In Mr. Trump platform, Republican platform in the United States, they clearly supported us, talking that they'll never recognize, Mr. Trump himself, Crimea annexation. True? Yes, that's true. That's another story why Mr. President...
I do believe that the United States will never recognize. They never recognized the occupation of the Baltic states.
Yeah.
But it took Mr. Gorbachev to come to power.
Let us not be Mr. Gorbachev. Sorry. Let's keep going. So what I think is important, preparatory stage, what I've briefly mentioned, humanitarian, medical care, and let's treat those people, you're absolutely right, under the temporary occupation like our citizens. Let's not cut off them, let's treat them. They are, let's say, we are ready to provide them, whatever, let's do that. But this is only the preparatory. Then I think realistic plan is to start real demilitarization. Meter by meter, region by region, city by city. Mr. Evgen Marchuk, by the way, I think elaborated a very good formula to withdraw from both sides at least artillery, at least mortars and other, let's say, weaponry killing civilians. Let's start with the stop killing civilians. I think this is the best ever initiative of Ukrainian government, president, and other, let's say, officials responsible. Then, the occupation. What does it mean, the occupation? That's the second stage after demilitarization. To bring back peaceful life for whom? For local communities there in Donetsk and Lugansk. Same time, demanding, insisting to get back our citizens who were forced to leave their, let's say, homes and apartments in Donetsk and Lugansk regions. I really think that the best ally ever for us, for Ukrainian government, to really stop war in Donetsk and Lugansk regions are those people who are suffering and still suffering because of being replaced by this war and Russian aggression. Then maybe why not local elections, maybe other issues with the international communities like OSCE and other, let's say, institutions there to bring back normal life. In common words, let's find scenario to substitute Kalashnikov with any other agenda for local communities. Business, yes. Medical care, yes. Whatever, guys and ladies. Do whatever you want, but not stop shooting, stop killing. Get from us, from Ukrainian government, whatever we can provide you with, but stop killing. Stop the actually
Is it possible to talk that way to Zakharchenko, who is the head of so-called DNR and LNR, Platnitsky? Is it possible to find them a common language?
I don't think that it makes even sense to talk to them because they have nothing to decide.
Oh, yeah.
I think the question is how you can bring our big neighbor friend to give this order, because it is clear those people don't decide anything by themselves. This is totally clear. Even this problem now with accreditation. You think that as whatever they call themselves, press office or Minister of Information of Donetsk, decide suddenly that they don't let in journalists. There was two issues this autumn, one with a report from Frontal 21, the other one from your colleagues, that showed this lady who did a beautiful movie showing when they say, put on some Ukrainian costumes and shoot a little bit back on us. So after this, I think that there was a clear instruction from Moscow saying, guys, if you cannot handle press, then for the moment, that's it. No one comes in and out, and now they will for sure send someone from our big brother who will put order in this and put system in this, and then you will see that accreditation will be reopened because there are still foreign journalists working in Russia. So they once again found a place where the local management was absolutely not able to handle the situation, so they stopped, and they will arrange it with help of some professionals.
Oh, yeah.
So without Russia, we can speak what we want about Minsk 1, 2, 3, 4. First of all, for me, Minsk is just a way of stopping massive killing. Minsk allowed to stop the completely active phase. Although the Debaltseve fall after Minsk 2, because Uncle Vladimir Vladimirovich decided to quickly, это еще надо. So this we still need to finish. So Minsk has for the moment the only purpose to stop this massive killing and the active fight. But even point one, ceasefire, there is no ceasefire.
There is no ceasefire. That's true.
So I totally agree with you, but I don't have any clue how this can be achieved.
There's no ceasefire, and also clearly the Ukrainian forces think that they cannot unilaterally withdraw all of the heavy artillery that there is, because there's a fear that, I guess it must be because they have a fear that the Russian-backed forces would try to take more territory, and so you can't, I'm not sure how much sense it makes to talk about doing things which are obviously impossible, like demilitarizing and getting, because you're talking about getting the other side to withdraw, and they haven't got an incentive to do so. The Russians aren't telling them to do so. The one thing that maybe Ukraine can influence is trying to influence the opinion of people in the territories that are not under Ukrainian control and in the areas that are, and the people who go back and forth. And at the moment, Ukraine's policies are having a negative impact on those people. They have a huge hassle to get across the border. People can't get their pension payments. They refused pereselenia. Internally displaced people can't get their pensions payments. I think that there are a lot of things that Ukraine could possibly do to try and improve Ukraine's image among the people of the Donbass, and I don't see Ukraine doing very much.
If I may, that is why we need international support, international coalition to influence Russia, to influence President of Russia, Putin, to actually order his forces, his FSB, his GRU and other stuff, stop killing and start really, let's say, demilitarization. That's just small.
But what can you do without international support? You have to look at what you can also do without international support, and what you can do without international support is try to do things that will make people in the Donbass feel more warmly towards Ukraine.
Agree.
Better communication as well with the information war, where they are being dispossessed. They've lost the field essentially in the Donbass region. But on the diplomatic front, I think the ruling from the Hague, the International Criminal Court report, is a very interesting opportunity for Ukraine. Just yesterday, obviously, Russia will disregard it, has disregarded it, and said that we don't recognise the implications of this, but it does give added credibility to the added weight to the argument. Again, this is Russian aggression, and that needs to be very much a key message for Ukrainian diplomacy going forward for months. It's not just, we don't say this, NATO doesn't say this, the International Criminal Court says it's the Hague, which is, however flawed or weak an organisation it may be, it's the premier voice for international law in this area.
Why hasn't Ukraine ratified the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court?
It's another good question, but they have recognised its jurisdiction in Ukraine.
I voted for when I used to be the member of the parliament. I voted for to recognize.
Do you know why it was not adopted?
Last question to the presidential faction in the parliament and Mr. Yatsenyuk faction in the parliament. Why still we have this double game?
What were the
My
arguments that were
opinion
made
is
at
to
the time?
ratify and go immediately with those proofs, evidences of Russian aggression and human losses and economic and social losses.
I think it's a very good question. Why? Because I think it's something consciously done. It's not just, you forgot, the usual bureaucracy that forgets things.
Oh, well, it can
No,
be
I
assumed,
don't think so.
It can be assumed that they fear that they'd also be brought to trial and they would have to face charges or certainly face awkward questions. That's as may be, but I think that fundamentally what this report does is again just adds more weight to the position. It makes the Russian denials look more ridiculous and alienates them more. And if we're talking about the American situation, for example, with the new Trump administration now, no doubt looking at these issues with a fairly fresh glance, it makes it all that more difficult to talk about some sort of a reload or a resetting of relations with Russia, because this is the International Criminal Court.
I think this really does contribute. I think Trump will probably be good for Ukraine on this specific issue, given the fact that the international community has been very clear that this is Russian aggression. And as time passes, the more that Ukraine makes public the evidence they have, and the more that they get support. And I think I would hope that the new Trump administration would support doing investigations and further providing evidence and intelligence to the international community, further confirming that it is Russia attacking Ukraine.
It was just one point about the report that came out of the Hague. When they were talking about, they were quite explicit about Crimea and a lot less so about Donetsk, but they did still say the signs are all there. And they specifically said from at least the 17th of July 2014, which, as we all know, was the date of MH17 and the disaster there. So basically, they're basing that, I would assume, I think it's a fair assumption, they're basing that finding, that conclusion, on the joint investigation team report, which the Dutch led. So in other words, but the point is, the evidence didn't come from Ukraine, it came from Holland. So Ukraine needs to be leading this debate rather than letting other international bodies come forward and do it. They need to be saying this is the evidence.
We are now here talking to Shuster. He was the first and the only one who broadcasted the truth next day after this terroristic act. I mean, this MH17 downing. 18th of July 2014.
Oh.
What did the other Ukrainian TV channels say?
Let me not.
No, but look, it was, well, forget about it. It's not really an issue. I don't remember what they said, but no one was investigating really immediately. Everybody was shocked. No one knew what to say. Everybody has his own owner, and you don't know what the owner thinks. And then you get oligarch 1, oligarch 2, oligarch 3. Somebody in July is on vacation. You can't reach him, and you don't have a position. You know, it's kind of simple. But what I'm saying is that the criminal court, basically, based on Crimea, they're saying it's a Russian aggression. Yeah? The tragedy of a Malaysian airplane, well, I mean, it's just part of that aggression.
Yes. But this was the specific date. You know, the date is I mean, you don't have Russian anti-aircraft technologies appearing in isolation.
No, absolutely.
If that's
absolutely.
there, that's the Russian army is there.
I also think it's very important.
It's a dinosaur bone.
The date is
you
very
can build
important.
the whole structure from that, and this is one of the keys to that. That's why that is such an important issue, not only for the tragedy of the loss of life in itself, but because of what it says about the bigger conflict. That if that was there at that time, then clearly that's a smoking gun.
But you see, all the reports that come in the Western press, American and European, yes, Russia has not ratified. It's withdrawing its signature, but Ukraine hasn't ratified as well. And no one understands why.
It's unfortunate in that sense, and it limits the impact in that. But in terms of the court of public opinion, you know, the reports about Ukraine have often been sort of couched in a he said, she said way. Well, they say that it's Russia. Russia says it's not. Now they can say, well, it's he said, she said. They said. You know, the international court has spoken now. That's the biggest authority yet to make this. And we've also had the UN vote, which was also non-binding, but also recognising the occupation of Crimea. It's definitely issued to Donbass, admittedly.
But Russia is aggressor.
Yeah, but again, these things are influential in the international opinion because they adopt not associated with, if NATO says, okay, but people will be inclined to say, well, of course they would say that because they have their own position vis-à-vis Russia, whereas the International Criminal Court in The Hague is recognized internationally as an authoritative voice.
Yes, I understand Russia's position, in a sense, Putin's position, that they're handling 10 cases now, out of which only one is European, and that's Abkhazia. It's 2008. And obviously, Putin is risking there a lot.
Yes.
Yeah, no, Ukraine is not on the issue yet. It's not yet a legal issue.
But it'll be going down the road for a lot in terms of legal consequences, in terms of them actually reaching some sort of verdict. I mean, it could be in 10, 15 years' time. Who knows, if ever. My point would be that it's something that Ukrainian diplomacy can use today. You don't have to wait for a verdict. This report in itself is already enough to become a centerpiece for Ukraine's diplomacy in interaction with Trump, all the European partners, with the international community in general, to say, guys, here it is. There's no ambiguity here. It's not just our evidence. But then bolstering it, getting the case together, getting international lawyers together to put the case as solidly as possible, and saying, this is the key. In my opinion, the Russian role is the key to the whole riddle, the whole puzzle. We're talking about, how can we get the people of Donbass? How can we, win hearts and minds in the Donbass? Or how can we influence people there? Or, interacting with whoever, Zakharchenko or whoever they have there at any given time. The Russian thing is the key. Until we address that, nothing's going to be resolved. And this is a way of doing that. This is a way of applying pressure.
It shows again the terrible job of Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine and of Minister of Information of Ukraine, because they don't manage to pass this message to the international community. Because again, I don't think that Ukraine alone can force Russia to stop this whole thing.
Not, yeah.
So internationally, when you go to Europe and you speak with people, in their mind there's ceasefire, everything is calm, etc. And I think again it's a mistake of the Minister of Foreign Affairs and their team and the Minister of Information not to pass this message that the day before yesterday there was again shelling in Marinka. At the very beginning, Mr. President was walking around in all major events, like in Munich, with pictures and everything. It's beautiful, but we don't have this anymore. So the interest of international media for Ukraine and most of international politics for Ukraine is very low, positive speaking. So make it not low and show the evidence. If you take small sample of Marinka 2 days ago, when you see a school with a hole like this in the wall, any idiot understands that this was not done with a water pistol, but heavy artillery. You saw in any international news anywhere any picture of this? No, it's barely mentioned here, because in any case it's happening each day. So,
But do you think that pressure of public opinion would change something? Because we're not pretending that that Angela Merkel or François Hollande or even Viktor Orban don't know that it's Russia that's behind this. Of course they know, of course they're convinced, but they don't know what to do about it, or they think they can get away with not doing something about it. I don't know what is the answer, but I'm inclined to think that they really just don't know what they can do.
Again, maybe on MH17, for Ukraine, the best and the most important message in high time to have prosecution, to set up trial here in Ukraine on those responsible for this terrorist act. Ukraine, and now there is no political will or any other reason, but why not to actually organize and to have this trial and to actually at least name those whom we could say that you are responsible for the organization, you stood behind this Russian Book M1 and all other, let's say, equipment brought to our territory to commit this crime, international crime. That's the best message we can and should actually send to the international community.
MH17 certainly shocked the world.
Yes.
But another event shocked the world, that Crimea was given away without one bullet fired.
But the world understands that.
That's another issue.
You think so?
The world understands that the Ukrainian armed forces were in no position to defend Crimea militarily at that time, I think.
Yes, and what is true that on 20th of February, Savik, we were here at the Maidans of Revolution of Dignity. 20th of February, Mr. Putin ordered to his troops, and look, 24,000 Russian soldiers appeared one day and night at the streets of Simferopol and other Crimean Ukrainian cities. One day, Russian Black Sea Fleet turned to be the occupational fleet. One day, they took under the control, you're absolutely true, all the infrastructure, all the, let's say, institutions and governmental bodies in Crimea. That's a real story. But who signed the agreement and actually the extension of the agreement for Russian Black Sea Fleet to stay in Crimea in 2010?
Of course, you know.
That's the actual, let's say, reason what happened and why happened in this way in Crimea.
I agree with you. I think Russia is very good champion in long-term planning.
Yeah.
What always shocked me is when I start to dig a little bit information about all these Donetsk and Lugansk things, and when I saw that the organization called Donetsk Republic was created in 2005 already.
Oh, yeah.
By gentlemen who are still having an active role, although they disappeared at one moment, like Mr. Purgin. We speak about 2005. Why 2005? Because the Orange Revolution had happened. And after the Orange Revolution, Uncle Putin thought, Jesus, that's not good for me. So this is long-term planning. So I personally think Ukraine had zero chance in Crimea, because this was not organized in February. This was organized 10 years ago.
It was activated
ready
in February.
It was
a plan that was already in place and it was activated.
So I think Ukraine had zero chance.
Well, they were told by the international community not to oppose it. They were strongly advised by European and America to not offer military opposition, we're informed now, according to the records at the time.
Yes, but Ukraine knows that Crimea is a problem since 1992 at least.
And what did they do?
Nothing?
Yes.
Nothing.
Yes.
They were completely infiltrated. Ministry of Defense was totally infiltrated. Your organization was totally infiltrated.
Absolutely.
We had Russians who were having government positions, Minister of Defense and other people. There was no Russian Ukrainian army in 2014. There was no. I went to Lugansk next to Milovo in March. There were kids staying there with 2 degrees, with summer clothes. And at that time, the inhabitants of Lugansk was cooking and preparing food for them and giving them clothes. It was kids, it was not an army. So
Shouldn't they have done something between 2004 and 2010 during the period after the Orange Revolution? That's when maybe
That
you
would have
could
been the moment. That would have been the time. But the situation in Crimea was very much like my understanding was always like they just left it be. We're not going to disturb you, so don't get too upset about what we're doing because we're not going to disturb you either. And it was autonomous in a very real sense, not just in a technical sense, but in a day-to-day sense. And you speak to people from Crimea, they're not surprised about the ease in which the takeover took place, unfortunately. Could Ukraine have offered military opposition at that time? I think it would have been extremely unlikely to have been successful. Maybe you could argue that it might have prevented the escalation into East Ukraine afterwards. It might have made the Russians think twice. I think certainly the ease of Crimea encouraged them to go into East Ukraine because they said, well, they're just going to roll up. They're just going to roll over. They're going to give up again. And that was presumably the assumption, the calculus in the Kremlin. But in terms of the military possibilities, they were extremely limited, I would say, in February, March 2014.
But coming back to today, Russia is very difficult to deal with, and we understand it. I mean, what we're doing in Aleppo in Syria is unexplainable.
Total mess.
And the international community cannot do anything and cannot deal with it. So basically, I think that Donbass is Ukraine's problem. Above all, first of all. And Ukraine has to find a way. First of all, to respond honestly. Do we want the people back? Or do we want the territory back?
Recognize, yeah.
If we only want the territory, we understand that it won't work. You have to get the people back.
Absolutely.
Then if you want to get the people back, you have to have a plan how to do it.
Absolutely.
Agree.
So you are just from there. How do you get them back? How do you get back that boy that you met in a hotel who is educated and smart?
This is the most scaring thing, how to get back the young people, because also I remember last year we were in Donbass Palace and they had this, how do you call it, Opusknoy, when you finish university. So there we meet young people, bright young people who studied, who speak language, English, German. And it was one of my biggest moments of depression when we asked one young guy, so what do you want to become? He said, I want to become a diplomat. I asked him, oh, where? Ukraine, in Russia? He said, no, here. I said, what do you mean here? He said, here in Donetsk. I said, what type of diplomat you want to become in Donetsk? Well, first, I want to work in the embassy, and then my dream is to become foreign affairs minister. And then you understand how difficult this whole stuff is going to be. I have not the slightest clue, but I know that for sure you need to work with those people. There's still a lot of people coming in and out. I personally think that you need to find a way to make the in and out somehow more difficult, because unfortunately what you say is not totally correct. There are people who are coming back and having 1 foot now on Ukraine-controlled territorium, restart their occupied territorium business again. So I think that the efforts need to be channeled to really encourage people who have good minds to restart their life in their hometowns, and to be very tough, not to let a situation happen. Again, it's with time. You get used to everything.
You're punishing the people of the whole region, and a lot of them are living now in territory which is controlled by Ukraine. A lot of people left behind family members, business interests, all kinds of reasons. They have to be able to go back and forth. And if they can't go back and forth, they get more and more angry with Ukraine.
I don't say that you should not go back and forth, but by allowing to sit on 2 chairs, it makes a return more difficult. I was before...
Gulliver, I'll tell you one thing. I mean, obviously, everybody talks about it, nothing new. But if Ukraine started building a state and a society which is more similar to Baltic states, to Poland,
Of course.
it would get rid of...
Corruption and everything.
it would become more attractive.
Yes.
Of course.
Yes, but that's Ukraine's plan anyway, isn't it? I mean, I would hope.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It needs to become reality and not a plan. This is the biggest issue.
You see here is today's New York Times. Here is an article written by Mikhail Saakashvili, Ukraine corruption unbridled. Yeah? And he says, I mean, we know the story because we live here and we hear him quite often, but in his article he says that basically Ukraine is very similar to Russia.
The elite is the same as
In the elite,
That's what
obviously.
absolutely the system
The elite
is,
it's a corrupt system, you know, and it's very difficult, 2 systems which are similar, you know, to find sort of, you know, kind of a solution which is civil. No, it's very difficult. Ukraine has to become different. No, and if Ukraine will not become different, it will be very difficult to get them back.
A threat to our national security. And corruption, let's call it, it's actually killing and shooting into the backs of our soldiers, and let's say deprive us of any possibility to restore peace and our national security and territorial integrity. But that's really dangerous.
The president said we have 2 wars, one on the east and one against corruption.
And
the one against corruption is even more.
It would have been a good idea to start fighting corruption on a local level in the east so that there would be no corruption on the checkpoints coming in and out of the DNR and the Ukrainian side. I remember one time going from Donetsk to Mariupol when I was still allowed in Donetsk. First thing we see after we hit the highway coming out of the separatist-held territory is Ukrainian traffic cops who want to get a bribe from people. What kind of symbol does that show to people coming out of Donetsk into the new Ukraine, which is cracking down on corruption? It's exactly the same as before, perhaps even worse. And they,
I'll tell you, when I worked in Russia, I had a lot of arguments because, I covered Afghanistan from the Mujahideen side. So I was not very well accepted among, say, the KGB elite, put it that way, even post-Soviet. And we argued, I said, you lost the war, not because Stingers arrived, because you were selling your weapons to Afghan resistance. you were super corrupt.
Yep.
You were selling weapons which were killing your own soldiers. There was absolute corruption in the army. That's why you lost the war. And here you have a situation which is sort of not great.
That's a good point. I think that the anti-corruption efforts would be best focused in the area that's closest to the conflict, where they could have the biggest impact. And also, I think there's an argument that local level anti-corruption efforts have a better chance of succeeding than on the national scale. But again, that was probably the idea with Saakashvili in Odessa, of course, and that didn't work out as they would have hoped, as he would have hoped, as we would have hoped.
On the international stage, I agree with you. I think that's the best thing Ukraine could do right now to promote itself, is to seriously tackle corruption. And look at the United States that spent so much money on anti-corruption projects here, police reform and things like this that have failed.
Jason, but look what's happening. Okay, Saakashvili, Dekonoidze, the police chief, out. All those young, enthusiastic Maidan supporters like Mustafa Nayem were not allowed anymore to represent the ruling party abroad, etc., etc., etc. We have so many signs that all that has been a show and it does not continue.
I think anti-corruption can only work when you really get the impulse from the top of the country. And when I see what happened again, I was unfortunately in Donetsk when you had your e-declaration talk show, it is all going around, and again, Ukrainian press is responsible in this field also. It is all going around, if this is legal, what is done on the top, or if this is not legal. No one is asking the question, is it ethical or not ethical? Right. Yes, it is legal that the president doesn't need to declare his villa in Spain. It is legal, because he declared the company who owns the house in Spain. Bingo. But is it ethical? This is the question. The same with the Panama Papers. I'm sure that what he did and his lawyers did was legally fine, because he has a lot of experts around him finding him the legal solution. But I always see the question is wrong here. No one is putting it. Is it ethical? Is an offshore company ethical? Is a house in Spain ethical? I think this is the question.
Yep. Well, we'll leave it open for today. Thanks a lot. Our time is up. See you next week.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.